everybody, and thank you for attending tonight's Cabinet meeting, and thank you for officers giving up their time this evening to join us. So nice to see you all. Let's move forward, and if I can have authorisation to sign the minutes of the last meeting, which was last year, 13th of December.
So moved.
Excellent, thank you. Any apologies for absence, Malcolm, do you, Lisa?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you. Additional agenda items, Malcolm?
There are none, Chairman.
And urgent decisions?
There are none this evening either, Chairman.
Disclosure of interest, to receive any disclosure from members, personal, disclosable pecuniary interest in matters of the agenda. If so, make sure that you repeat these at the declaration of the report. We'll move into item 6. If I can just remind everyone to make sure that they haven't got anything that's shielding the microphone, and to turn the microphone off if you're not speaking, and speak into the microphone. I think this is all about getting better quality on our facilities. Right, so the item 6 is the draft revenue budget proposals, a report of Anthony Baden, our Chief Finance Officer. Tony, to present the draft revenue budget 22-23 for approval. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So yes, as the Chair said, this is a report to update members on what is essentially the second phase of our budget process. The first phase was when members recall was when we reported the high level medium-term financial plan to Overview and Scrutiny Committee back in November 2021, and then that went to Cabinet in December. So it's a more detailed report than the medium-term financial plan, and Cabinet were asked to approve the draft revenue budget for consultation with Overview and Scrutiny Committee later this month. And once Overview and Scrutiny have considered the final report, we'll take it to Cabinet again on the 7th of February, and then that report, or that budget as it stands then, will underpin the council tax report that goes to full council on the 21st of February. So the headline figures, the Appendix A summarises the funding gap as about £3.3 million in 22-23 before we plan to return to a surplus position by 2025-26. Appendix B gives a lot more sort of further detail at a service level. Appendix C summarises some of the major changes between the 21-22 budget and the 22-23 budget. And Appendix D shows the impact on our reserves position, which has changed very marginally from the medium-term update that I gave members towards the end of last year. So the local government finance settlement, well, that was eventually announced on the 16th of December. What I've included in the report this year, which I've not done before, is because there's quite a lot of noise nationally, if you like, around what the funding settlement means for local government and the public sector in general. So I've tried to sort of dissect that a little bit at a high level and give members a bit of information around that. And a phrase that members might be familiar with or may have heard quite a lot in respect of the settlement is a phrase called the core spending power. And that is basically, it's the government's view as to how much money they think the council needs to fund its services. And I'll explain that a little bit in paragraphs 5 to 9. And basically our grant allocations, when they're announced as part of the settlement, they're based on our core spending power figure, so it's relevant in that respect. And you'll note, or members will note, that the core spending power figure has increased by about 6% from 21-22, which is good news for the council. One major drawback with the settlement is, again, it is only a one-year settlement, so it doesn't give us a guarantee of future funding sources or future funding streams. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail when I come on to talk about the grants. So rather than go through the whole budget report, I'll just focus on the main changes that have occurred since the medium-term plan update. So we've reinstated the £250,000 for the homelessness budget, which was spent in 21-22. I reviewed that with the head of service, and we felt that was an appropriate thing to do given the current levels of demand. Inflation, this is an incredibly difficult budget to predict and remains still to be the case. The main changes in inflation are in respect of the the national insurance increase that kicks in from April 22. The inflation equation, if you like, that's built into the refuse contract, that equates to roughly 5%, I think, of an increase in contract, and an overall increase of roughly 4.2% on energy costs. So we've increased our inflation provision since the last statement, if you like, by around about £500,000. But as I say, it is very difficult to predict. It's difficult to predict at the best of times, but 22-23 has been especially challenging. We will aim to manage increases over the 2% within the current service budgets, but this may not be possible. So what I've done is set up a budget contingency, or what we've done, or proposing to do rather, is set up a budget contingency of around £200,000. It gives us a little bit of flexibility in that respect, should we be hit by unexpected cost increases. So I did say I'd say a little bit more about the grants that we've received from government. These are covered in paragraphs 22 to 25. We didn't originally plan to expect to receive any new homes bonus grant, but we have got £467,000 given to us for next year, so that's very much welcome boost to the coffers. We've also got what's been termed a services grant of £164,000. It's a little bit like the COVID grant that we received in the 21-2 settlement. It was a one-off sum of about £500,000. Well, we've got a one-off sum of £164,000, as I say, termed services grant. That is specifically a one-off grant. There's no indication that's going to continue into next year, and that has been explicitly spelt out in the settlement by the DLUHC. We've also got LTSG, lower tier services grant. We did get money in 21-22 that we weren't expecting for that, and that's continued into next year as well. So that's £107,000 that we weren't initially forecasting. So again, that's a welcome increase. Rural Services Delivery Grant, that's increased very slightly by about £30,000 more than we were expecting. And the Local Council Tax Support Grant and Benefits Administration and Homelessness Prevention Grants, they're all broadly in line with forecasts. So as I say, I think I've mentioned before in previous reports that the government have committed to undertake a fair funding review, but again, that's been pushed down the road by at least another year. There are signs, or very definitive signs from government, that particular sources of income, such as new homes bonus and the lower tier services grant, will be considered as part of that fair funding review. So that rather implies that there will be a continuation of that funding. But what it looks like for rather, we don't know at the moment. So it's not being prudent to put that in our future estimates. And as I say, the other grants, such as the benefits and administration grant, the local council tax grant, and the homelessness prevention grants, they're all part of our sort of core funding, and we expect those to continue anyway. So there are probably a few areas, only a couple of areas that I want to go do a little bit more work on, or we need to do a little bit more work on before we have a final budget position. What I will be looking to report in the next budget report is the update on the budget consultation. We've had, as at the end of last week, I think we had about 93 responses, which I thought was, I haven't had time to analyse what those responses are, but that's quite encouraging. I didn't think we'd get that many actually, so that's a really positive sign, and I will do an update on those responses once the consultation period has changed and finished rather, and I've had time to analyse that information. So I think that's really all I can usefully add for members at the moment, Chair. So overall, I think it's been a good settlement in many respects, but unfortunately, the underlying financial challenges still remain.
Thank you very much, Tony. I don't think we sort of anticipated anything other than a certain amount of uncertainty going forward, and thank you very much for the work you and your team have done to bring it to this sort of situation so that we can really look at it, and it's ready for going to scrutiny, I believe, on the 24th of January, following the consultation. Before I invite Kevin to move this report, are there any members that would like to make any observations of Tony? Councillor Bayliss, Christine?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. There are a couple of points I'd like to make. The first one is where you've got in paragraph 20 about the council tax base. the reduction in the take-up of council tax reduction scheme, where you talk about, it looks like a reduction, an increase in chargeable dwellings by 291. I mean, I think that sort of says quite a lot, actually, in regard to the council's post-COVID recovery strategy and the way that's been run and developed by officers, that actually the economic impact of COVID has had the edge taken off it. So I'd like to congratulate officers in your team, Tony, and also in your team, Ben, who have worked really hard on that, and I think that's a good sign there, a good impact. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, and I have given you notice of this, is around Bexhill special expenses, which is something that I'm quite keen and interested in. And if you remember last year when we had a discussion about that in this, budget setting process, we talked about, for example, one of the items was the Bexhill Town Forum, and we discussed whether we would continue to fund that in the current financial year. Now, as I understand it, the Bexhill Town Forum is not met, is not meeting. I've spoken to Councillor Langlands, who's the representative on the group, and she confirms that at the moment it's ceased operating. It's not drawn down any of that £4,000, and I would be keen that before we start setting the budget for next year, that we actually we discuss that and whether we actually remove that from the next year's budget, because as I understand it, it's a sort of rolling roll forward. And there is also the question about the Christmas lights money that was always included in the Bexhill special expenses, about actually whether we take that out of the special expenses. This is a debate that potentially we could have, and I just wondered if Tony could let us know when we will be able to discuss those issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. If I just quickly pick up on the council tax base figures first for Councillor Bayliss. I mean, our assumptions around the council tax base, we know what the council tax base figures are at the end of November at a given point in time. We use that as our starting point. The figures going forward are largely dependent on new builds, new dwellings, which does link into, I think, the point you're trying to make, Councillor Bayliss, about hopefully the success of Alliance Homes rather going forward and delivering some of the objectives that it's looking to deliver. So I just wanted to clarify that it's still, those, like most budgets, those figures can go down as well as up, but we're hopeful that they'll go the right side of things. In terms of special expenses, I mean, I'm more than happy to move on a meeting between now and scrutiny, or certainly between now and the next cabinet meeting, whereby we discuss with members what items of the budget that particular budget we want to remain in and which items we don't. It's a fairly straightforward budget. There's not much in there, and maybe it's something that I could do with Councillor Dixon and Councillor Bayliss. I don't mind.
Okay, Tony, that's fair enough. I think it's a point that was taken that we can note to make sure we attend to that. And before I invite Jonathan, who was next up, Sue, you might want to mention that in view of the other work that we would need to do. Please do. It's a good idea.
Thank you, because it is related to the point that Councillor Bayliss has made. And just before I do that, Tony, you and your team, congratulations. I mean, who would run a company when you only knew your budget on the 16th of December and you only knew what was coming for 1 year? Who would actually run a decent company that way? So thank you for the challenge, meeting the challenges. What I was going to say was that when we took over, we realised that there were funding gaps already, and we set up working groups within each department to look at where savings could be made. We also talked about protecting discretionary services. Now, I think this is time that this was taken forward in a more formal way, and my suggestion is that we actually set up a working group on this, and it would include people from the community, particularly people from finance and from legal, because of the legal challenges as well. So I think we should just get on and go ahead with that. And the issues about Bexhill and Rye special expenses could be part of that work. And I would like that to start as soon as possible. Thank you.
I think we're in agreement to that. I think we've got to make a start on that, and the beginning of the year is as good a time as any to go on. Councillor Vinal, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tony. The new homes bonus, I just wanted to this is really just an amount of money which the government has given us to, if you like, fill in the gap between the old scheme and the new. Is that correct?
In truth, sorry, through yourself, Chair, it's difficult to know because actually our new home, if you're putting everything to one side, actually our new homes bonus funding was due to run out at the end of 2021 too. Hence, we didn't put anything in the budget for it. So it does feel like a bit of a stopgap measure. I haven't had opportunity at the moment to go back and review this particular part of the announcement in detail. It feels like it is a stopgap measure to take us through to the fair funding review, but it's quite difficult to tell. And sorry for being a bit flaky, but I just don't know. But as I say, we weren't expecting it, so it's an absolute bonus. We thought our funding would taper off by the end of 21-22.
How does it actually compare to the last payment we had for new homes bonus?
I think for 21-22, I can't remember off the top of my head. I think it was about 250,000 we received. I'll have to confirm that. I don't
Thanks.
know that
It's a bit of an unfair question, but thanks. It sounds like it is a
probably
bonus.
an incorrect answer as well, but I will double check.
Start again. Any other questions before I invite Kevin to move the report? Oh, yes, Councillor Cortell.
Thank you, Chair. While looking from 23-24 at annual savings of about 2.1 to 2.2 million a year. Now, the Chief Finance Officer has explained to me that about 1.7 million of this will be devolved services to Bexhill Town Council. Unfortunately, in an article in the Bexhill Observer last Friday, the Mayor of Bexhill appears to believe that if the Town Council take over services from Rother District Council, the money will follow. I think he seems slightly misinformed on this, and it means that negotiations with the Town Council on the devolution of services are potentially going to be very difficult if that is the belief that town councillors have at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for your observation on that. I think there's work to be done on that, and I think that this will come together when we start to meet with the representatives of our towns and parishes with regard to packaging what goes forward. So I think that's a bit of an early unfair position to sort of ask a question of that at this moment in time, if I can deal with it that way. Kevin, can I invite you to move this report and make any observations?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to remove the report of the draft budget to go to consultation with Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I think a number of good points have been made today, and Tony says that this is a better settlement than we were expecting, but it's still not brilliant. We've still got to take from reserves, and the work carries on. And Councillor Prochak makes a very good point, and Councillor Bayliss about special expenses. We certainly do need a working group. We certainly do need to get on with this. And I'd like to point out that we need to get this resolved and a way forward by this coming December of this year for budget setting for both parishes and district for the next year. And that's when it starts, is in December. So time is of the essence with this work, and it does need to happen. And of course, there's a slight impact with still having special expenses. Is you'll note that Tony is only proposing a £4.67 increase in the council tax, where we can have £5, but because of the special expenses impact, we can only do £4.67. Now it's only 33 pence, but believe you me, at the moment every little helps, and it would be nice to be able to get the full increase in the council tax. So I'd like to thank Tony and his team for all the work that's been done. I'm very interested to hear back from Overview and Scrutiny about anything that they think we could do better. I don't think there's an awful lot of wriggle room, but it will be interesting to find if we have any comments. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Kevin. Paul, it hasn't come to scrutiny yet, but I just wonder whether or not you had a view on this, and thank you for attending this evening.
Thank you, Chairman. No, I just thought I'd better turn up and make sure and listen to the debate first, so I'm fully informed, so I can sort of hopefully direct the committee to make the right decisions or find the right money. Maybe there's a special pot of cash down the back of someone's pocket that they've got that we haven't seen, but I wouldn't think there probably is.
It's normally the sofa, I think.
Yeah, could well be.
Thank you, Paul. Have I got someone to second this? Councillor Christine Bayliss, thank you. And those in favour of the report? It's unanimous. And again, I'd just like to thank Tony and his team. And it was interesting, we had a Chief Exec and Leaders meeting this morning that, every authority are acknowledging the work put in by our officers over this very difficult period. That's not to be taken for granted because, as you say, this information coming to you, less than a month ago, and then having to put these reports together. So thank you very much indeed for everything that's being put together to enable this report to happen. Right, if we'll move on, we are, just bear with me again. So, agenda item 7. Review of the Housing, Homeless and Rough Sleeping Strategy, 2019-24. And this is Ben's report, stroke Joe's report, but I think Catherine has joined us tonight to present the report. Is that right? Welcome, Catherine, and nice to see you.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report is to update members on the progress of the Improvement Delivery Plan for the Housing, Homelessness and Rough Sleeping Strategy 2019 to 2024. The strategy has 3 main priorities: increasing housing supply, improving measures to address homelessness, and improving the quality of accommodation. The outcome of the full review can be found in the updated Improvement Delivery Plan, which is Appendix A, and a summary of all actions achieved since the strategy's inception in 2019 is included in Appendix B. For the purpose of this report, I will go through the key highlights achieved so far in 2020 to 2021. Priority 1, the increase in the supply of housing. An Alliance Homes board is now in place to oversee the activities of the housing company, and Blackfriars is the most advanced scheme with a total delivery of 335 new homes. The scheme will deliver at least 70 affordable homes of mixed tenure. We are also setting a target to increase the number of active registered providers delivering within the district from 3 to 6, as well as encouraging delivery through for-profit registered providers. Temporary accommodation acquisition. So when I wrote the report the end of last year, I've got a slight increase in figures because we've currently got 7 RDC-owned properties operating as temporary accommodation, which is reducing the net cost by approximately 30%, with an 8th property completing shortly, and a further 9 to 10 units of accommodation in progress as well, offers we've had some offers accepted this week. And we also have a property management and support pilot in progress for those temporary accommodation properties. The Empty Homes Action Plan. An officer group is now meeting to deliver the Empty Homes Delivery Action Plan to identify empty properties and work to bring them back into use. And the group is including colleagues from various different departments. We've got the private sector housing team, as well as the Rother Tenant Finder Scheme, and affordable housing colleagues also. Priority 2 is excuse me, looking at accommodation and support initiatives. To give you an update, there's a lot of activity in this area. We've got 4 new units of supported accommodation for rough sleepers as part of an East Sussex-wide Housing First scheme. And we have 4 further properties under offer to increase the number of Housing First units to 8, hopefully by the end of March 2022. 12 respite rooms across the whole of East Sussex as part of a 12-month pilot with support of the independent domestic violence advisors. We're hoping to co-locate them within the housing needs teams when we can come back into the office more. And £255,000 over 2 years for new support workers and landlord incentives to improve accommodation for ex-offenders. The Bexhill and Rother Homelessness Unity Group, which many of you may know as HUG, has remained active throughout the pandemic, and we continue to commission the safe space at St Barnabas Church. Just over £4.4 million over 3 years has been awarded as part of a Sussex-wide bid to the Changing Futures programme, and that's to review the network supporting those experiencing multiple disadvantages. And in particular, the female rough sleeper cohort has been identified as the first group of people to work with. Improving the quality of our existing housing and new building housing. For the first quarter of the year, due to the pandemic, officers from the environmental health team were unable to inspect properties, and tenants were reluctant to allow builders to enter into the properties to carry out any repairs. But also there were approximately 119 referrals in 2020 to 2021 for the Warm Home Check service that's delivered by East Sussex County Council, which provides energy efficiency advice and financial advice around heating, which, as you can imagine, right now is quite key to those individuals. That's everything. Have you got any questions?
Well, it made me quite breathless there. There's an awful lot of work that's been undertaken. And, thank you so much for the officer team that led by Joe and Ben's involvement here, and Catherine and the team. I'm sure there may be some questions. Catherine.
Thank you. Can you hear that? Because it says don't move the microphone, but it's somewhere away from me. Anyway, yes, two things. First of all, I thought I heard the officer say Blackfriars and 334 houses. I might have got that wrong, because the report refers to 200 at Blackfriars as part of a total for 335. And I would hate anybody watching this from the public who hadn't read the report to think, hang on a minute, they've been telling us it's 200 and now it's 335. So I just wanted to clarify. 335 is the total. 200 is coming from Blackfriars. As long as that's clear, that's fine. The other thing is, though, it talks about prefabricated houses and flat packs, etc., which really is rather old technology, isn't it? I mean, now we can have 3D printed houses, which is so much more efficient and cheaper and can be built faster. So I would hate this report to be limiting us in our options when there are other things out there. Thank you.
These are the modular houses that I think that we're very keen to promote. I don't know, prefabricated just conjure up in my mind concrete and asbestos. But Joe, did you want to come back on that point? Read the numbers, please.
Yeah, happy to. It's 200 homes delivered by Blackfriars. The council feels you're correct. It's slightly awkward wording in the reports. Actually, I was speaking to Ben Hook about just before we started to clarify the way it's worded in the report. Yeah, so 200 delivered from Blackfriars, 335 from the sites that we have under development presently. Yep, the term prefabrication came up from overview and scrutiny, so it landed in the recommendations. It's already part of our temporary accommodation strategy, adopted temporary accommodation strategy to explore all options, including, we would term, modular options. Yeah, they can be a useful tool across a range of options, and one we're considering.
Thank you very much, Joe. Councillor Timpey. Hazel.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just go back to the empty homes action plan? And we've had 5 properties that we've had action taken, but we've got over 400 empty homes, don't we, in the district? And I just wonder, is the low number because of resources? Because we've been doing this plan since March, so I'm just curious as to why the number's quite low.
We have just adopted recently the empty home strategy from one of our colleagues, Richard Parker Harding, leads on that in the environmental health team. So as Catherine picked up in the report, we have, to complement that strategy, we have formed an internal working group that includes the private sector housing team who do the inspections on accommodation of poor quality. There's our housing needs team and the Rother Tenant Finder service that can provide landlords who own empty homes with options for bringing those forward, including our own temporary accommodation work and the purchase of accommodation if that's required. And we're always open to looking at private accommodation for purchase. If anyone's listening who has had such homes, so that it's hopefully providing a virtuous cycle of identifying homes that need work, approaching, finding those owners as part of this group's work, and then offering them solutions and working with them to bring those homes forward. It is still in its infancy as an approach. So it's fair to say that the numbers are modest at the moment, and we hope for them to improve. But ultimately, this is all being delivered from within existing resources. So it is something we will be exploring in order to try and expand as part of our wider programme of bringing forward property for use.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, did you have a comment to make with regard to this report?
Yeah, thank you. It's just something that we've picked up in previous years with regards to empty homes. What you tend to find is whilst the numbers remain high, the actual homes that are involved in being empty homes change quite regularly because the overwhelming majority of empty homes are as a result of probate, which is why they sit empty for quite some time. They trigger into empty home status, but there's not really an awful lot you can do with them whilst the legal ownership question's there. So that's why the numbers remain steadily high, and the ability to impact is not quite so high just because of the legal position of a lot of those homes. I just wanted to sort of help clarify the context of those numbers, really.
I appreciate your comment on that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say very quickly, I was actually blown away by this report. Really amazing what we have done. And Joe and team, fantastic in what you've done in this short time. I mean, we used to be looking at something like single figures for building affordable homes. But that's what it used to be, the reports. And taken to the Ombudsman for putting somebody in temporary accommodation in a totally unsuitable place outside the district. So I really was just astounded at what has been achieved in such a short time. So I'd like to congratulate you and your team.
Yeah, I really would endorse that because I think we've made some massive progress to be proud of, that we have a proper structure there being looked after in very safe hands by the professionalism of our officers. And thank you very much indeed, Joe and Catherine and Ben, and pass it through to your team. Paul, did you want to make any observations? I think this came up to scrutiny back in November, I believe, and recommendations are there. Anything else to add to it, please?
No, not really, Chairman. We same as cabinet members. We were very impressed with this report, and pleased to see it going forward. You obviously know that the prefabricated homes come from a certain member who's very passionate about that area, and I'm it made me sort of chuckle a bit, the thought of a 3D printer printing a house. If ever time I press print, it comes up and says paper jam or something. So that would just be a complete nightmare for me, the idea of a 3D printer printing a house. I think I'll stick to brick and blocks myself, if you can get hold of them. We was pleased with the progress, and as Ben said, the figure of empty homes isn't the same homes. It's constantly revolving. That was a question that we asked as well, and it revolves over. So it's not the same few houses sitting there empty for years, although we all have them in our own wards, I'm sure. And it would be nice to see them. People are funny, aren't they? They'd rather pay council tax on the empty house and sit there because their granny owned it once, instead of just taking the 300 grand and doing whatever else they want to do with it rather than have it sit empty. So it just seems, to me, empty property is almost a crime. So, but that's just me. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. If I can invite Councillor Byrne Terry to move this report, unless there's any other questions. There is another question that's come in from from Councillor Cortell. You did give me, I think you gave prior notice that you were going to be asked this question, and maybe an answer for you.
Thank you, Chair. Bexhill and Rother Homelessness Unity Group, known as HUG, I'm delighted they've been recommissioned to deliver the safe space at St Barnabas Church. Is this, however, an acknowledgement that despite the superb work of the Rough Sleeping Initiative, there are still rough sleepers in Rother, or have they been simply commissioned as a precautionary measure?
Joe, if I can invite you to respond to that. Catherine?
Thank you, Chair. With the safe space at St Barnabas Church, it's not exclusively for rough sleepers, so you will find that there are other people there perhaps experiencing loneliness or isolation in a different format, or perhaps experiencing poverty in various scenarios. So I would say it's more than the rough sleepers. So although I think at our count it was 2 in October, November time for rough sleepers, and we've obviously got the Housing First that is bringing some of the rough sleepers into accommodation. It is more than just the rough sleepers that HUG will support, and we're very grateful for that service.
Sorry, I appreciate that HUG do a lot concerning lonely people, poor people, former rough sleepers, etc., with their 3-day-a-week welcome sessions. I was specifically referring to the safe space, which is a night thing, specifically to sleep there. And what I'm trying to establish is that night service just for 2 people.
Is a response to that, Joe, please?
Yeah, there's no night service as part of the commission. It's just a day centre that operates. I think it's gone up to 3 days a week.
Yeah,
3 days a week. So 3 mornings a week. It's an open space for vulnerable people of various sorts to feel comfortable to come in, access food, access some, human contact often, and support with a range of issues, including rough sleeping. But it's really for the street community, as we describe it, in a broader sense, but also people who are experiencing loneliness. But there's no accommodation as part of it.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that, and I think it's important. This is part of the overall complement of what you're doing. If we can move on, Councillor Byrne, Terry, if you could just move the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Before formally moving the report, I think we can see from the questions that have been asked what a wide-ranging subject housing and homelessness is. We've gone from the legality of home ownership via probate. We've gone into rough sleeping. We've gone into modern building methods. This really is, every part of housing, homelessness and rough sleeping is interlinked. And I think the team are doing a wonderful job. Many councils try and compartment this. That doesn't work. And I think we can be very proud of the fact that we've got our services interlinked within the council, and externally we try to link the support services that these people in housing need, of any sort of housing need, we try to link those support services together to form a rounded service. So it really, I mean, we've all been congratulatory about this report, and it is, but just to look at the scope of the problem, I mean, it's all very well to do well on a topic, but to do well on a topic like housing and homelessness, it really is remarkable. And I think if you look at the recommendations, targets achieved as listed in Appendix B, to be removed. Let's not dwell on the stuff we've already done. This is a report that's looking to stretch their targets to increase our performance in all those areas. So it's pretty heartwarming. And hopefully it's sort of not only heartwarming, but heartwarming to some of the people who otherwise would be on the street. So this is a marvellous report, but it's not, there are laurels there, but they're not to be rested upon. And I'm sure no one's going to do that. So I'm very happy to move this report as read.
Thank you, Terry. And a second to that?
Yeah, I'd like to second, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Hazel. And I think those in favour of this report, I think it's been a wonderful piece of work that's been done. As you said, we don't sit back now, we just move on, and there's always room for improving what we're working on. I think it's actually tremendous. And this is a real bonus for us. It's a great success story for this administration and for officers, so thank you so much. I think we can move on to item 8, which is the... sorry, Catherine, did you want to leave us now to go home for your supper? Please do, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. And Joe's going to accompany you. What's on the menu, Joe? Yeah, good night. Okay, let's start again on agenda item 8, carbon baseline approach for the council's activities. Report from Ben Hook. Ben, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is a paper that we took to overview and scrutiny at the last meeting for their consideration, and obviously now here with Cabinet for confirmation. It's long been known that we want to do an organisational carbon baseline. This is the sort of the baseline of the organisational output, so anything that's generated either directly or indirectly from Rother District Council. As we got further into determining what that baseline should look like and how it should be calculated, we realised that there was quite a number of options that you can and can't include, or you may wish to include, and we felt that it was best that this was decided upon by members rather than by officers, and best included with the likes of overview and scrutiny, and to be discussed later in this week at the Climate Change Steering Group. So what's in front of us now is the opportunity to look at the various three scopes for inclusion within the as identified by the greenhouse gas protocol. They are scope 1, which is direct emissions, things that the council directly controls, so the usage of our vehicles or vehicles on our behalf through employees, our council buildings, so on and so forth. There's scope number 2, which is emissions that may be generated through energy that we purchase, gas, electricity, etc. And then scope number 3, which is the indirect emissions that result from other activities that occur within our supply chain. It's the officer's recommendation that we look to include scope 1 and scope 2, and where possible, scope 3. And having discussed it, the output from overview and scrutiny was that we should definitely be looking to include the emissions included within the waste contract as part of our own baselining for monitoring purposes going forward. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Right, questions, comments? Catherine Field.
Yes, thank you very much. Could I say how very much I welcome this report? But for absolute clarity, this isn't the starting point. Work has been happening to reduce our emissions and to quantify what it is we're doing right from the minute that the climate emergency was declared. I do welcome this report. I think this is the right approach. Scope 3 is always difficult, but just because we can't necessarily quantify it doesn't mean we shouldn't be working with those to whom we issue contracts to make sure that they are as compliant as possible with our own goals and objectives. However, I don't think it quite goes far enough. I think, well, we need a steering group meeting, and we now know that that is happening this Thursday for members of the steering group only, but it will be on Teams, so anybody can watch, I believe. We need also, I believe, to develop a set of key performance indicators arising from this so we can really monitor it and really give our work some focus and direction, because we've only now got 8 years left before we need to be there. We also need to identify sources of funding, and I believe Community Infrastructure Levy has a sum of money being set aside for this work. So I would also ask the panel that is distributing that money to meet as soon as possible after the Climate Emergency Steering Group has in fact identified some projects we'd like to go ahead with, so we can get on with that quickly. And that we need, if we're going to do all that, to amend the terms of contract of, that must matter to me tonight, the terms of reference for the Climate Change Steering Group to reflect what I have just said. You've all got it written down, thankfully, so I don't want to have to go over it again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. There have been some notes made on this, which I think we're all quite comfortable in accepting from this report. Thank you, Paul, for all the work that Scrutiny did previously to bring this forward. I think it is very important. I think we all grasp the fact that we have stalled a wee bit because of various issues that some of them beyond our control. But now that we're where we are, we need to be full speed ahead, if you like, because it's vital that we start to make some real progress on this. Councillor Sue.
Thank you. Yes, and obviously, yes, welcome this report. There was a suggestion from one of the backbenchers that we should have one of these sort of thermometer things outside the town hall to show how we're reducing our carbon usage. We are already reducing it hugely by actually having flexible working, so that we're not driving all over the country, all over Rother to get to meetings, etc. And that's I don't know how we measure that, but it should be measured. The other thing is that it has to be approved at full council. But once that is done, I think we should have a still meeting, particularly for the carbon amount, very soon after our meeting this week, because I think we need to be getting on with things. And just to let you know that Councillor Field and I attended the Joint Waste Contract meeting last week, and they are already working on a huge amount to do with decarbonising the fleet. And as early as March this year, we'll be getting a report from the consultants who are advising on the way forward. Remember, that's the Joint Waste Contracts, Hastings, Wealdon and ourselves. So that is being taken very, very seriously. And I do know that Deborah Keneally is looking at the garden, what do we call it, parks, I want to call it parks and gardens, but you know what I mean, that contract, because also huge savings can be made there. And I'm hoping that companies like that will also be able to measure carbon reduction to add to our knowledge. But yes, I'm happy to second this.
Thank you very much. Any other comments to be made, Paul?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think it's sensible to use the 19 to 20 council year as well, because that's the last normal year, if you like, except for the last few days of that financial year that we can work on. But I think it was all. I think we mentioned as well that sort of in our contract, sort of like a grounds maintenance contract, we have quite a big sway, if you like, because we can, as a council, can dictate to the contractor, you know, battery-powered chainsaws, battery-powered strimmers, blah blah, as opposed to fossil fuels. So we can sort of dictate to them, and I know that, you know, equipment is coming forward now that you know will run and will work. So when they make the investment in their equipment, they can make the investment that saves them using the carbon. It also assists us. So it's got to be a good thing. But that's sort of something that is in our gift, if you like, to you know, say the contractors to do it. And the same with the waste contractors, as Sue has just said. You know, with the price of fuel and everything else, and the pressure that they'll be under to reduce theirs, if they can look at hydrogen vehicles, then it saves them money, but it assists us as well in the overall picture. So it's got to be good.
Yeah, thanks for making those comments, Paul. And I think this is a collaborative working when we're working with our partners in order to ensure that they're looking at the same agenda as we are and that there's progress there. Councillor Cortell, did you have a question of Ben on this, please?
I do. I'd like to request that in due course we extend the carbon baseline to measuring total emissions across Rother and not just the council's emissions.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that'll be noted and that we can work with that going forward. Catherine has moved this report. I think Sue has seconded this report. Are there any other comments? No, those in favour of? Okay, I can read them all through if you wish me to. For people watching, thank you very much indeed. Okay, so an amendment is that the report is welcome and that needs to go slightly further forward with regard to proposals as follows. 1, the Climate Change Steering Group holds a meeting as soon as possible to consider projects that will contribute to a reduction in carbon emissions from the Council's activities. 2, as part of the process, a set of key performance indicators are to be developed to allow the process to be effectively monitored. 3, sources of funding, including potential community infrastructure levy funding, are assessed and progress where feasible. for the terms of reference of the Climate Change Steering Group are amended to reflect the above points. I think we've all got a copy of this. Okay. So I think we voted on this. We're about to vote on this. I think those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ben, for bringing this report together. Just bear with me. We'll just move forward to the next item, which is the local enforcement plan, agenda item 9. So this is updating the local enforcement planning, updated local planning enforcement plan, which I think is sort of some 5 years or so ago. Is that right? I believe it's a little bit dated. Thank you for that, Miles. Thank you for joining us this evening, Miles, and your report to seek member approval for the adoption of the updated local enforcement plan. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. To keep it brief, yes, the current enforcement plan is 5 years old, and there's been updates to the NPPF, National Planning Policy. There's been adoption of the local plan, the DASA plan 2019. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has had a big impact in terms of curtailing investigations, in terms of site visits, as well as leading to a very large increase in the amount of enforcement complaints we've got coming our way in the last 18 months or so. So it was decided that we needed to update this plan. It needed to be improved in terms of setting out, I think, what we do, what we don't do, how we do it, how we prioritise, and what are the likely timescales when things are in our control, and also be very clear too when they're not in our control. For instance, if it goes to court or if it goes to appeal, we're subject to different organisations' timescales. It is quite a long plan, but a lot of that is details about the plan enforcement toolkit. But I have put it in relatively, I think, quite efficient kind of text, I hope, in terms of what it sets out. I also like to add that we did have planning committee having a briefing in November on this. I felt it was very positive, and I think I'm not alone in that, and I think many suggestions were made, and quite a few of those suggestions have made their way into the report or added to the report. So I hope that that positive feedback has been reciprocated in the report and reflected in its revised content. So I'll leave it there and just be happy to answer any questions. Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Miles, for the work you put in on this in conjunction with the lead member for planning and also the consultation that was held with members. I think it's important, and hopefully the feedback was there. Can I invite Jonathan to make any observations, please, Jonathan, before you move the report?
Thanks a lot, and thank you very much for Miles for doing this, and thank you for getting the planning committee together to review it, to ask questions, and to make suggestions to improve it. As you said, you took up quite a lot of these. It is out of date. I think enforcement is a big issue. We're all concerned about enforcement. What this does is really sets out the process so that people can understand to see what they would expect when an enforcement complaint is made and the timescales. And this is just part of some of the processes that Miles is reviewing and if you like, fixing, because our enforcement area really does need to be better structured, and that is happening now. It goes far beyond just this structure. It's how it's managed and how all the different complaints are prioritised. And we have had a significant increase in complaints over the COVID period. I think it's gone up 3 times. So it's an enormous additional demand on a limited workforce. So I know behind the scenes also the existing enforcement complaints are being cleared up and prioritised or dealt with accordingly. I think it's really important to understand, and this document goes some way to doing this, is that enforcement is done to ensure that planning is complied with. It's not done, if you like, on behalf of somebody who has a complaint with their neighbour, if you like, and that's one of the misunderstandings. But setting out clear timetables will really help residents understand what they can expect. It's not a situation where people would like, in nearly every case, the council to go in with guns blazing. Enforcement takes a long time, and even when you get to the point of an enforcement notice, should that happen, there still is a long process after that, and it's very hard to explain this. And because of that, one of the things that I want us to do, assuming this is adopted, is to have a session sometime when we can in the near future to brief the towns and parishes on this, because that's really where we get a lot of feedback from. And I think for them just to understand that and have that opportunity to ask questions as to why things don't happen in a timescale that perhaps people expect. Something's gone wrong, fix it. I think, what we have to do is to make sure that where we have the really serious breaches is that we get on top of those big ones, quickly and deal with them quickly and manage the rest of them. Because I think it's about 95%, it might even be higher, of complaints end up with a permission or something similar. And so it's not as bad as it looks, but it takes a lot of time and effort. And so I'm really happy about this. And I did want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Miles, because he came in September, I think it was September. I'm going to say September, and he didn't quite understand the issues that he might confront, but he figured it out pretty quickly, being very experienced. And we started in September with the serious backlog of planning applications. We're all very aware of that. And since the release of our head of service and our previous DM left about the same time, he's managed to clear up something in the order of 200 to 300 of the backlog of complaints, taking us down to somewhere in the order of, I'm going to say, circa 4 months. It might be a little bit more than that, 4.5 months of applications, which is a substantially improved position. I want to thank you for that, because I know you've been working incredibly hard just to sort those out behind the scenes, and at the same time bringing things like the enforcement process up to date. And there's a whole lot of other systems. I know you're working hard at that. And also, I think it's important to remind everyone at this point in time that he has also updated the pre-app service, which is gone live again, I guess now really, from January. It's sitting there ready, it's on the website, and also introduced the PPAs, which is the planning agreements that larger developers can come to us. And the impact of that is important, because if people use the pre-app service now, there is a guaranteed time, there is a cost, which has been updated because it was last updated in 2014. And how did that happen? That it's been not looked at for 7 years. So there's a cost to that. But if somebody has an application and they follow the advice, if there's a few extra things they need to do, it'll mean that application goes through a lot quicker. And that's the idea. So hopefully that will all work very, very well. So thank you for that, and very happy to propose this.
Thank you, Jonathan. Before Sue, I believe, going to second this, Christine, would you like to ask a question or an observation? Yeah. And Kevin as well.
Yes, sorry. I perhaps should have raised my hand to ask a question before Jonathan spoke. I mean, I would like to say that I've read through this and feel quietly confident that we're on sort of, if you like, emerging from the, it had to get worse before it could get better situation. And, my role as the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Economic Development, I talk quite a lot to developers and people who are entrepreneurs wanting to, create the jobs that we want in Rother. And there is definitely a sense that we've turned that corner. So I would like to say thank you for that. In terms of this enforcement paper, I've sort of picked out the emphasis on customer care. This idea about giving people some sort of clear guidelines about what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And from some of the cases that we've been dealing with, where because of shortage of staff, perhaps we weren't able to go back to local residents and keep them up to date with stuff. It does cause a lot of angst. So I'm really, really pleased to see that emphasis on customer care in the paper. I'd just like to raise a question about the Section 215 notices, because as the chair of the Town Centre Steering Group, the Bexhill Town Centre Steering Group, I am becoming more and more concerned about the number of empty shops in our main shopping street. And I know that maybe 18 months ago, 2 years ago, I raised the issue around a particular shop and premises in Devonshire Road, which has got bullet, unfortunately, it's air gun pellets, but there are bullet holes in the glass. And I did raise that with officers who said that that probably wasn't a Section 215 territory. But I think it is, because it detracts from the town centre, and you could almost argue that actually we've had a sort of like more empty shops resulting from that. So I would like to say if we're going to motor on Section 215 notices, I've got a couple of cases I'll come to you with. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Just on that point, I think what's interesting was Councillor Vinehall was talking about bringing in the parishes, town councils. They're going to raise issues. Some of these issues may be cross-service issues. Do we coordinate work with street scene and with that wider kind of enforcement presence? And it may be something we can look at in terms of that, to have more coordinated approach. And I think it is, we can always revisit cases as well and have a look again and look at it. And if you're looking at it in that wider context, perhaps there's we take a wider view on it. So, thank you.
Kevin, Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to mention the enforcement weekly list that we receive as councillors, and I believe parish councils do as well, and the changes that have been made to that in recent weeks, and how helpful it is for ward councillors to actually have a bit of a commentary on what is going on with enforcement, and most importantly, if nothing is going on, why it's not going on, because that has always been the biggest problem, is a lack of knowledge. So I'd like to thank the team and maybe pass on to the officers how valuable that is, and the more that's written, the better, as far as we're concerned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kevin. Sue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Miles, you're making a huge impact. I mean, did we know that this hadn't been looked at since 6 years ago? We didn't. And so thank you for sorting these things out, which desperately needed sorting out. And I love the lists where you have a housekeeping meeting and sort out some of the backlog that doesn't need to be there. So thank you for all that work. And it is making a big difference. But and also thank you for consulting with the members, because I know that was really useful and you made changes. Usually with something like that, would it go out to a proper consultation, including the parish and town councils? Because I think that's one area, and I'm glad Councillor Vinehall picked it up. If any of you, and there are a number around the table, go to a parish council or town council, you will know that enforcement is one of the big concerns. And it may be that they don't understand the protracted nature of it. They may, but some things need emergency action, not protracted. And so I am keen that the parish and town councils have their input as well. And clearly, if something's waited 6 years, perhaps it could wait another 3 months for a proper consultation. I don't know. I know you'd probably rather get it in place. And Councillor Vinehall suggested that we have some kind of meeting with the parish and town councils. But if views came forward, that could you still make changes? So I quite like your views on that.
My view is that it's quite well advanced. I think there's a lot's been taken on board. I think we're looking at improving that, how we deal with the parish councils and how we communicate with them. And I think in time, certainly as things change, we've seen a lot of changes in the last few years. It could well be that we're looking to review this on a fairly regular basis. And it could be the time then when the parish council's input, that could have an influence on perhaps a review of this a couple of years down the line. Perhaps.
Can I just come back then? Could we have a commitment tonight that we would actually include a Teams meeting with the parish and town councils? Yeah. Fairly soon. Thank you.
I think there's a RELT meeting on Wednesday afternoon, and perhaps that could be raised then, just to mention it to something to look forward to. The comment was made, a number of complaints we've received. Presumably this is a national trend, I would imagine, so it's not just us in isolation. I think the other thing is to manage expectations. I think that when you bring out a new enforcement plan, there is an expectation that goes behind it all, but I think we're looking at planning enforcement being the key part of it and not neighbour disputes because somebody doesn't like the look of something else. But I think under the demands that you and your team have had, and thank you also for Ben, who's been able to be instrumental in bringing this new way that we've been able to deal with our planning team. Thank you very much for bringing it to where we are, because you've been with us since October. It's only January now, and to pick up this piece of work with all your other demands, I would acknowledge that, Ben and Miles, and I think all members would acknowledge that. I think we've had it moved. I think we've had a second, and I think we're in favour of this. If I can just show my hands, and that's unanimous. And thank you very much indeed. Are you going to leave us now, Miles? Okay, fine. I wasn't sure whether you were involved in the supper that that Catherine and Joe went off to. Are you going to remain, Ben? Yes, fine. Okay. Okay, right. Item 10. The report to Cabinet. Rotherbilt Leisure Facility Strategy. This is Deborah's report, brought together with Cabinet member Hazel Timpey to seek approval and funding to procure a leisure facility strategist to provide a built leisure facility strategy to be informed by independent market research. So, Deborah, we're looking forward to receiving this report.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, everybody. Yes, this report is to seek approval and funding to procure a leisure facility strategist, informed by an independent market research to form a strategy going forwards. Following a review by the Project Steering Group in June 2020, Cabinet of 27th of July 2020 approved the suspension of a project to develop the former Bexhill school site as a leisure destination, given the COVID pandemic creating uncertainty in the leisure industry sector and its impact on future leisure requirements throughout the community. At that time, Rother District Council undertook to review the built leisure facilities in the longer term across the district as demand for leisure activities became clearer following the pandemic. The built leisure facility buildings in Bexhill in particular are coming to the end of their structural life, and patch repairs to the current structures are no longer economical or environmentally efficient. The buildings need major refurbishment or replacement. And alongside this, the current leisure management contract ends on the 31st of March 2024, and a new contract to operate the leisure centres will need procuring. So time is of the essence. So it's important and timely that a strategy is agreed for the provision of appropriate leisure centres for the future. So this report recommends the appointment of a company to complete independent market research across the district on who are current users of leisure sites, including council-owned sites, and what facilities they are actually using, who are not using the leisure facilities and why, and what facilities current consumers and potential users would wish to have. And also the report recommends that the council appoints a built leisure facility strategist to undertake a review of the existing leisure facilities across the district and, informed by the independent market research, provide an evidence-based proposal on a built leisure facility strategy that is realistic and achievable and supports an active and healthy lifestyle across the district. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. And I think that really covered off the brief that was brought together by Cabinet Lead. Are there any questions? Catherine.
Thank you. I think this is absolutely the right approach to achieve a facility for the district, as long as the market research includes people who have never used the facilities, because clearly we need to know why. I'm slightly concerned about lack of democratic input in recommendation 2, I would have liked to have seen the delegated authority to be granted to the director in conjunction with the appropriate cabinet member. Thank you.
Any other observations before we invite Malcolm? You made a noise as if you might want to say something.
I was, yes, thank you for spotting that. I was just going to say, yeah, I've no problem with adding as Councillor Field has requested. Yeah, we can add that into that recommendation. So it would read Director of Place and Climate Change in conjunction with the portfolio holder.
I think that's fine. I think that, you know, from a point of view of an alliance, there's got to be a consensus on that. So perhaps we could identify that with the portfolio holder and leader. I think that's important that we grasp that. Christine, did you want to make a comment before I invite Hazel, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I wanted to make the comment, well, congratulate both the portfolio holder and Deborah Keneally for bringing this report forward now. I think it shows that we made an absolutely sensible decision when we suspended, as opposed to cancelled, but suspended the decision. But I would like to ask a question about how much we've retained in our seal pot for the actual work going forward, because as I recall, there was some element of funding put aside for the leisure centre when we made the decision to suspend, and whether that money is still sat in our accounts.
Ben, Tony, are you able to respond to that, please?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Through yourself. You may well be right, Councillor Bayliss. I'd have to go back and check about whether the source is from SIL or not. We did have a project in the capital programme of several hundred thousand, I can't remember the value exactly now, which we put on hold at the beginning of the pandemic for, I think, well-documented reasons now. So that's there on hold, but unfunded effectively. We've got 140k in the capital programme for the to fund minor refurbs, as is explained in the report. So I'm not sure that's really answering your question, because I'm not sure about the SIL source. But
okay. There seems to be a rush. Who wants to make a comment here, Ben or Jonathan? Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so it's not SIL funding. This the money that we're talking about was Section 106 funding, was obviously pre-SIL. That was ring fenced not specifically for a leisure centre, but for leisure services in the community. And I think the majority of that has been redirected towards the Cityscape Park project. There may be some left on that. I'm not entirely sure, but I'll have to check on that. But it won't be a substantial amount, because there was time limits on what we could do in terms of spending it as well. So I think there was some redirection of that funding anyway. But I'll get the final answer for you. I'll consult with planning and with finance to make sure we get that to you.
Okay. Any other Jonathan?
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that. The original proposal had an allocation of SIL, but it didn't really have an allocation of SIL. What it had was a borrowing against reserves to be paid for when the SIL was generated, and that was probably the most effective way to have bankrupted the district council. And if that approach had been taken, we would be bankrupt today, or thereabouts. We'd be certainly very close to the Section 114. And but the new SIL approach, which hopefully will be adopted at the next full council, has provision for just that. And I would hope that probably you put in your infrastructure statement the leisure centre. So there you go. So it will be considered along with all the others. So I think that's the important thing. But I'm really pleased about this report. I know when we had the first discussions about the leisure centre a couple of years ago, and it was just following on from the original plan. And to me, this is a really thoughtful and intelligent approach to come up with something that's going to really benefit more people than perhaps the original plan might have done. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Did you want to make a comment, Sue, before we invite Hazel?
If I can, thank you. Yeah, it's clearly it's the right thing to do, postpone and look at it again, clearly. The one thing I wanted to mention, and I mean, the Bexhill Leisure Centre, as it is, it certainly isn't for people who live in my patch at all, because I don't think they would travel as far as Bexhill. So it's interesting that you said across the district, because I think people's idea of leisure, and there must be studies now, has changed totally with COVID. You know, the outdoors, and we've got the Battle Health Walk, which is a superb example of, for all ages, of what people really want to do and want to get outside. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Healthy Action in Ageing in Rural Europe, that piece of work that's been done, research done in Rother, which is Rye and Robertsbridge, and there were 4 conclusions, and one conclusion of relevance here was that actually older people do want to exercise, but they do not know where, how to access it, what kind of things are suitable for them. So I hope that whoever is doing the strategy will take into account this whole change that we've had in our culture and our attitude to leisure, and we're certainly reflecting it in our well-being and healthy aspects of the council.
Certainly, I think we would all endorse that. Hazel, I know you want to move the report and say a few comments, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a wonderful time to put this forward now, because we do need to resolve the fact that we did put it on hold, but there is obviously a tremendous need. But everything has changed. If you look, there's a report back in September from the Association of Public Service in Excellence, and the chief, there's a group that Cultural, Leisure and Officers Association, but they did a consultation to 250 councils across the country, and I think 97% said that they need to actually look at their leisure services and how they are in fact offering them to the community. And it's interesting that you say about the accessibility, because a theme came up about a leisure service should be within 20 minutes of every single resident, not necessarily a all singing, all dancing facility. It could be something that's attached onto a doctor's surgery. The ideas are endless, and I think the strategist will I hope that she looks at, or he or her or whatever, look at this report, because it's actually full of tremendous information. I mean, for example, 2/3 of the stock in the country of leisure facilities are in urgent need of structural repairs. But there are councils thinking, well, is that actually what we want to do? Is that what we want to spend our money on? And so I think we are really doing the right thing here, and what is needed, definitely, because it's a significant investment, whatever we do. If we have satellite facilities or whatever, you're talking significant money, and we have to have evidence that we're going to spend it to the best use we can. So I applaud Deborah bringing this forward, and I certainly hope that we have a responsibility also to consider our healthy Rother aims that we have identified in our core strategy and bring it all together, because that was the theme of this report, that not only are we talking about physical activity, we're talking about mental health, care within the community, all sorts of things, integrated systems and physical activity, because it's a preventative measure, keeping active. Anyway, I'll stop now and move that we accept the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Someone to second the report?
Yes, I second that report, Chairman.
I think that, there's a little bit of history with all of this, and it was a right decision for us to pull away from the all singing, all dancing rebuild there. Well, as soon as the hotel opted out, and the Ministry of Defence, I think, took 5 years to say that you can't have the drill hall, it was all looking a bit wonky. And in a way, I suppose that those delays were fortuitous, because if the button had been pushed prior to that, as has been commented this evening, we could have been looking down the barrel, and that would have been very, very uncomfortable. So I think that we now need to that's the wake up. We're resetting it with this report, Deborah, and thank you very much indeed, and Hazel, for the input of putting this report together. And as I've said before, a wake up, resetting, and let's take advantage of the opportunities that we're seeing up and down the country, because it's not just, the healthy aspects of leisure and fitness and well-being, rather it's the whole country, and we can learn from what others have to say. So if members would like to vote on this report, that's unanimous. I think thank you very much indeed. And I think that virtually concludes ourselves this evening, Malcolm. Thank you very much. And that's something like 7:50, is that? Okay, we'll look to close the meeting, and thank you for those that have attended this evening.